Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Paul Elam, and today I am talking with Arvis Owens. And we're going to dig a bit into what's going on in the military with the false accusation industry. Anybody that's not a stranger to my channel will know false accusations is a problem in the civilian world. It's gone rampant with Me Too and all other kind of problems. But it appears that we don't hold a candle to what's going on in the military these days. Now, as a veteran myself, I can certainly tell you, I look back to days in the 70s when I served, and for instance, if a woman popped up with a baby and said it's yours, the Army would take your money first and ask questions later. Uh, uh, and it appears that things have not gone in a better direction since those days. Um, Arvis, tell us, what got you interested in this? Was it personal experience?
Paul, it exactly was that. It was personal experience. Uh, Look, no, not to be disrespectful, but I was wrong. I had an extramarital relationship with a coworker, and she falsely accused me. I went to a military court martial. She said things such as she thought no, but she never said it. She said that I didn't raise her pencil skirt, she didn't raise it, but it flew into the air automatically, causing her legs to open and things like that. And I defended myself. I testified in my own defense, and I was amazed that even though the panel came back and said, hey, we made a mistake, can we vote the conviction? The military said no. And I started to fight, and I couldn't get the media involved, the mainstream media, to be interested. And during that process, other men started coming to me and said, this happened to me too. And so that's how I got into this.
And what were the consequences that were dealt to you from the court martial?
So here's the crazy part. I was facing 30 years in prison. They didn't send me to prison for one day, but I was given a dishonorable discharge. It's called a dismissal for officers, and I was forced to register as a sex offender.
And that still stands.
Sort of. So what happened is when I started fighting in earnest, I started immediately. It was 2013, but in about 2021, I got a petition together, which I'll share with your audience a little later. And within 2 weeks of having that petition, the state of Virginia removed me from the sex offender registry. From a person I know inside, he said they contacted the military and said, hey, is this guy telling the truth? And they looked through the file and they were like, he is. And so Virginia didn't want to get sued. And so I was on for about 8 years. Normally in Virginia, there's tiers most places, 1, 2, and 3, with 1 being the lowest. I was given the 1 tier. You have to wait 15 years. You have to go to a court to be taken off normally. I was on 7 years, 10 months, and they contacted me and says, hey, based on our review, we're taking you off, because they were worried. So, but I still have that conviction in my file. The military does something called titling. So even if you get found not guilty, Paul, your title in these FBI and these databases, and it looks like you were convicted anyway. So when they do the background searches, it still pops up.
How much of this do you think is political?
All of it, all of it, Paul. All of it's political.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, you sent me some documentation, some communications that were had with Kirsten Gillibrand over what's going on in the military. Can you fill us in a little bit about that?
So I will start with that, and then I'll take you back even further when it started in about 91.
Okay, so, and by the way, just for viewers, we'll make these documents available.
Perfect. So basically, there was a survey taken around the 2008, 2009 timeframe. And what people do is they will take a survey based on a question, and then they'll project it out to the force. That's what they did. So Kristen Gillibrand decided she wanted to make that her personal mission. So she got with other female senators, Congress women, and things like that, and President Obama as well, and decided that she wanted higher results for sex assault convictions. She wanted more results. She wanted more convictions. So how does she do that? one way she did it was on the Senate Armed Service Committee, Paul, they were reviewing the records of admirals, generals to be promoted on your record on sex assault convictions. So if you didn't submit a case forward, it had to be reviewed by the top JAG. She put laws in place to strip you of rights. You couldn't tell about your good soldier, good sailor program. And she wanted results, or she threatened to take away the authority, the convening authority's power, if they didn't produce results. So we both know how the military works. If politicians hold the stranglehold on the money, so they complied. And to give you an example, just a few of some of these cases, I tell people we have cases where the DNA evidence showed it wasn't them, they still were convicted. We have cases where the accuser, and I say accuser because one of the problems she created is to call them victims immediately, even when you haven't seen the evidence, even when the evidence doesn't support that.
Believe the woman.
Exactly. That was part of it. It was believe the woman. So the question I asked is, what happens if a woman accuses another woman? Which woman do you believe? Right? Then do you believe the evidence? So we have people who had video confessions of their accusers saying, hey, look, I was in trouble. And so I made this confession. So what the military did was you weren't allowed to use that confession in the court. Even though a trained agent was there listening, he wasn't allowed to testify. These are the types of cases I'm talking about to your audience, Paul.
Geez, you think rape shield laws are bad? This is absolutely insane.
It is insane.
So is there a course of action for you going down the road to clear your name?
So there is
Totally.
there is an appellate process, but you get a service level appeal from the Court of Appeals for your service. But then there's something called CAF. It's the Court of the Armed Forces, which is like our Supreme Court. The challenge is most of these cases were not reviewed by CAF. Just like the Supreme Court, they review a very small number of them. The other issue is that prosecutors, judges, investigators, convening authorities, generals, and admirals, all part of this. And so sadly, most of these cases, they had no relief of them. So what we're trying to do is bring attention so that the military, Congress can acknowledge they did this and correct the mistakes that were made.
I saw in some of the documentation you provided me an affidavit from a rear admiral who had regretted pushing forth to convict somebody and found that evidence was credible when he actually believed it wasn't. What are the details of this? What happened in this case?
So there was a Navy SEAL. His name is Keith Berry. So he was out in California. He was dating a woman casually, but she wanted more than a casual relationship. And when he rejected that, she accused him of sexual assault. So Rear Admiral Lords was his convening authority. And ironically enough, he was the guy who convened my court-martial as well.
Oh, wow.
So what ends up happening is there's a court-martial. Keith is found guilty. This guy's a war hero. They put him in prison. They deny him his medication because he won't sign a confession to say he did it after they convicted him. He's like, I didn't do it. So years go by, and then someone writes Admiral Lords once he's retired. And if you read that quote, he says, hey, look, I knew this guy was innocent, but I was worried about the president, President Obama, and Senator Gillibrand. And so I asked, why would a two-star admiral be worried about the then president of the United States and a senator when the evidence supported it? So that affidavit got Keith a new trial. So he did not get relief at the appellate court. He wasn't reviewed at CAF, but because his convening authority issued this affidavit, they had the Air Force. This was a Navy case. They put it to the Air Force, and they brought in the head of the Navy JAG Corps, as well as her deputy, who became the head. And basically, they pressured him, Admiral Lords, to not upset the findings because there was so much political pressure on them to get results, to get convictions.
And I'm guessing that pressure came out of the Pentagon.
Congress initially, but yes, and then it came through the Pentagon. Stuff rolls downhill still, just like it did when you were in.
Sure. What is this about his medication? What he was denied?
Right. So what the military would do is you would get found guilty, get sentenced to prison, and then they wanted you to sign a confession that said you did it. So our guys, many of them said, "No, I didn't do it. You found me guilty, but I'm not going to sign a confession." And so in Keith's case, they put him in solitary confinement. They wouldn't give him his medication because they wanted him to sign admitting guilt. So
What kind of medication was this? Do you know?
you know what I do? I don't want to go into that detail for
Okay.
privacy's sake. But again, he's a war hero. He's seen many things, done many things, and so people could probably guess. But
Okay.
again, it
So
was
we are talking about post-traumatic stress, injuries that he got in the service of his country.
he has been injured in the service of his country. Again, I don't want to go into specifics of
Right.
what it was, but
Sure.
but it was the idea that you would deny him his medication because he refused to sign a confession when he's like, I didn't do this. And
Yeah, that's some Nazi level stuff going on right there.
it is insane. I would tell you, Paul, a lot of people, they think the US military can never do something like this. But you're exactly right. I use the Nuremberg trials. And if you're familiar with them, which I'm sure you are, they said, hey, look, I was ordered to do it, right? And so in the military, we get taught you're not supposed to follow an illegal order. But that's exactly what happened here. They received a bunch of illegal orders. Um, I've had, I've got an active duty chaplain who has told me about how it increased the suicide rate. I've had attorneys, investigators come forward to say, we didn't want to do this, but we got pressure to do so. We had to prove a result. And again, I've got countless examples. We have one case where a young man, he was an officer in the Air Force. He found out his wife was having an affair. So she not only had the affair, she got impregnated by the other man. He was a coworker. So he files for divorce. He gets custody of their daughter. So I want you to think for a second, Paul, in this country, the odds of a man getting not only custody of a child, but custody of a daughter. So he gets custody.
A military man, no less.
A military man, too. Again,
yeah.
So she goes to civilian police department 1 to file sexual assault charges. They investigate. There's nothing. They throw it out. She goes to civilian police 2. I think one was police, one was sheriff. They throw it out. They investigate. They said there's nothing here. She goes to the military and they pick it up. And it gets even worse, Paul. Here's how it does so. Her lawyers go to the military man, and says, if you give up custody of the daughter, we'll drop all charges. He says, hell no, I won't do it. I didn't do it. He actually said a little stronger word than hell no. He said, I didn't do it. He expected the military to protect him. He goes to court. He gets found guilty, right? And then not only does he get found guilty, that's when he loses custody, but his mother's a smart woman. So she calls the lover on the phone, and he admits that he not only lied in military court, but he received $10,000 before. We have that recording. So she takes that, she submits it to the military, and they give him a hearing. So he's in prison now. So it turns out that the guy not only got $10,000 and he lied, he got $100,000. The $10,000 was an installment, right?
Oh my.
But here's what most people don't realize. The military has no authority over civilians. So if a civilian lies in military court, they don't have the authority to go after them. Now, they could send it to the Justice Department, but the question I've asked and no one's ever answered, how often does that happen? And so that's a case that we've had. We've had, like I said, ones with DNA evidence, ones with recordings where they didn't allow the recording to be played in court. And we go, look, we don't want women to be sexually assaulted. We don't want women to be raped. So we agree with that, but we don't want men to be falsely accused. And the fallacy that some argue is that it's only 2%. And what's interesting is I asked them, how did you get that 2%? And one answer I got back was the accuser had to admit she was lying or they were lying in order for you to believe it was a false allegation. And if the evidence showed they were lying, you put that in an inclusive category. But we've made progress. They started out saying 2%. Then they said 2 to 5. And now they said 2 to 10. but they've anchored that 2% in people's minds. And so they think about that without asking how.
So that gives the feminists their talking point out there in the public that only 2% of accusations are false, when we know from a variety of different sources that the number is much higher than that.
Right.
Indeed, many people believe the majority of sexual assault accusations are false.
The FBI did an investigation of about 25,000 cases, and about 25% of them is what they found. And so that's the crazy part.
If you trust the FBI's conclusion.
Right. And so that's the interesting part, though. We can go to the FBI and find out, well, how did you count it? Whereas other groups, when they put out their number and say 2%, they never tell you how. Like, how did you get that? And think about what the jury hears is in the military at that time, the commanding officer, the convening authority, could cherry pick the jury. So what they do is they would pick the pool that you pick from it. So, hey, I've given you 20 people, pick 6 from that. You don't have unanimous verdicts in the military. You can send cases without probable cause to court, only in the military. In 2004, there was an innocence bill. The only group not mentioned, not included, the U.S. military. And again, more so than that, the Innocence Project or the Conviction Integrity Unit supports every single person in the United States, in this country, except one. And I'll let you guess who that is.
The military man.
The military man.
Wow. Just amazing. You know, and I almost hate to say this, but this is something I've long felt from my own military experience and seeing what happens to guys who get accused. This goes back a long time, way back to the 70s when I was in, and that I have to tell young men, and I hate to do this, don't serve. The military will throw you under the bus on an accusation in a heartbeat, and it's still going on. And I hate to make this political, but I got to ask you, do you think that there's any more of a chance of things improving now that there's a different administration with a different mentality, a different Secretary of Defense?
I really hope that there is. I would say that nobody likes to take the mantle for men who've been falsely accused. And so I honestly hope that President Trump and Secretary of Defense Hegseth do take this up. I realize that there's tremendous political pressure on them not to, but if anybody will buck the trend of that pressure, I think it's more likely them than anyone else. So I really hope so.
Fingers crossed. Do you know of, are there efforts going on to address this right now that are organized?
So we have people who are trying to get it to their attention. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on right now with the government. And so with all of that noise, it's kind of hard to be heard over it. So we have efforts where we're trying to get that to them. Whether or not it's there, we don't have confirmation yet. So, but we will continue to try and bring that to his attention. And that's why I do videos like this, because I guarantee you someone in their orbit is one of your listeners, one of your watchers. And that's why, again, I want to thank you for having the courage to do stuff like this, and your audience for listening.
Absolutely. Tell us a little more. Tell us about the personal cost to you from this conviction. What did this do to your life? You're United States Army officer.
Navy officer.
I'm sorry.
Close enough.
I think in terms of Army, but sorry about that. But anyway, you're a naval officer, and the next thing you know, you're literally disgraced by this conviction. A dishonorable discharge is just like the worst outcome for military service. How did this affect your life personally?
I'm glad you asked. So I've had one speeding ticket in my life. That is the extent that I've been involved with law enforcement my whole life. I was suicidal. I had planned it out. I was going to kill myself. It's one of those death before dishonors, because I didn't think anybody would believe me. You know, I testified in my own defense, but I had a dishonorable discharge. I was on the sex offender registry, and many of the people I thought were my friends, I lost them. supporters, people I had helped in the past. My wife gracefully stuck with me, supported me, helped me, and I was very close to, like I said, committing suicide. Employment is impossible unless someone vouches for you and gets you in there. We have one person, it took his congressman to help him get employed, our family members, because not only are you on the registry, you got a dishonorable discharge. So you're competing with everybody and you no longer have that network. So that also impacted me. I would tell you severe depression, right? Even when I got past the point of not committing suicide, just severe depression and how you're treated as a person on the registry. It's people will come to your house, your neighbors found out. I've had neighbors who I thought were my friends, who knew me for years. They abandoned me. So you're ostracized by your community, your network. And let me take employers off the hook a little bit. I've had some jobs that were interested and they said, look, our liability insurance will go up. Let's say we hire you. And then somebody in the office Googles you, sees the conviction, and then they falsely accuse you. And then our insurance will just settle because they'll say, well, you knew he was on the registry. You knew he had this. It was so I do give a little credit to employers is that they'll say, hey, look, we're worried about our image. We're worried about our customers finding out. We're worried about this. And so what happens is your skills go down, right? So your skills go down. Your experience is not there. And so that's been the personal impact. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, my wife is an amazing woman, but it has put a strain on our marriage that it's still there. It still exists. There's still not trust there completely. And so those are some of the personal traumas that I've experienced, and many men like me go through it. It's some of them have homelessness. I give the example with Keith, the Navy SEAL I told you about earlier. He couldn't get a job driving for Uber. That's his favorite quote. The reality is he couldn't get a job at McDonald's because they don't hire people on the registry. If you were convicted of murder, Paul, and you serve your sentence, you can get a job. But if you've been convicted of a sex offense, no one will help you. No one will support you unless they're a family member or someone who's gone through it themselves.
Your one point about employers is well taken. I hate to defend people for those kind of decisions, but there is that problem in the law that if they hire somebody on the registry and then another accusation happens, then they're likely to end up with treble damages for negligence in hiring.
Right.
It puts them in an impossible situation, even if they want to hire somebody. This is like the scarlet letter on crack.
Correct.
Just absolutely amazing what we're doing with people. How many cases have you in? I know you've been working on this kind of as an activist. You're out here now trying to talk to people about this problem. How many fellows have you met over this time of different people that were falsely accused and punished?
Hundreds, Paul. I want to say one more thing about no VA benefits too for officers who've been dismissed. So you get none of that as well.
Wow.
I've met hundreds of men who've been falsely accused and wrongly convicted. And I'll add this piece. I had a retired female. I want to give my support to, there are females who see this as wrong and they want to help. She was a YN, she was a yeoman and a paralegal for a tour in the military. In 1 year at one Navy region, she personally saw 500 cases. So I tell people, I've met men, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard, right? So I've met hundreds. And then I met one person who saw 500 in 1 year, one service in one location. It was in the San Diego area. Paul, she raised that issue to her command and they fired her. And she was the number 1E6 at the time. So I got her to do an interview a long time ago. And then there was pressure because they said, why would you tell, right? Is it like she waited till she retired, but I have that interview. I could share it with you. Unfortunately, she no longer interviews, but I have the one that she did. And she came to me and it was 500 she saw in 1 year. I have a retired LAPD detective out of California. He's personally worked on about 600-700 cases himself. So there are thousands of men this has impacted. And the military knows. There are defense advisory committees that have heard. And so we're hoping that they will push forth what's called a conviction integrity unit.
Okay. That makes some kind of sense anyway, but you know, this them reacting this way to her speaking about the problem, why would you tell? That sounds like consciousness of guilt to me. That sounds like we know what we were doing was wrong.
Paul, they do. They do know what they were doing is wrong.
Yeah.
Again, I don't want to underscore that there was political pressure, but yes, they do know what they did was wrong. The military thinks in, like, are you a Western fan at all? Did you grow up watching Westerns?
Oh, yes. Are you
As did I.
kidding me? Yeah.
I'm from Texas, so I love me some Westerns.
Yeah, me too.
So there's the good guy and the bad guy in the Western. And that's how the military think. If you notice movies, any portrayal, the military is the good guy, someone else is the bad guy.
Yep.
Paul, in this situation, who's the bad guy? If you had Congress implicated, you had a president implicated, you had the military, that's the hard part. And what they know is, how will the American people trust them with their sons, right? In fact, I tell your audience, some of your audience never interested in the military. Here's what I say why you should care. I said, if you can't trust the military to be fair to your sons, then how can they keep you safe? 3 questions. Question 1 is, will the best and brightest join the military if they know they'll be falsely accused and wrongly convicted? I would say no. Question 2, if the best and the brightest who are already in the military find out that they won't be treated fair and just, will they stay in? My answer is no. So if the best and the brightest won't join, and the best and the brightest won't stay, who is left to defend you?
Maybe not the people you really want defending you.
That's what I want to say. Is people have different reasons for joining, and I understand that. And Paul, I never discourage someone from joining. What I do is I tell them the risk of joining that they do not know. And they've been using a delayed entry program, which is why I encourage everyone listening to send this video to everyone you know, everyone who's thinking of joining the military, because a lot of parents don't know. I asked them to ask the recruiter one question. What are you doing about false accusations and wrongful convictions? And then I want them to watch and listen. Listen to what they say and watch and hear in your mind what they don't say. And then if you decide to join knowing that, then go ahead.
It's amazing. That is the same precise advice I give young men about women, is to ask them questions and listen to what they say carefully and to what they don't say. I want to go back to this thing with Obama for a minute. I think it needs to be said here. Going back to the Obama administration, we had what was called the Dear Colleague letter. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it literally instructed universities across the United States that had federal funding to lower standards for concluding that a sexual assault had happened, to reduce the evidence from a preponderance of the evidence to something like semi-reasonable doubt, whatever, a much lower standard, making them ready to convict people. It wasn't any different. This is what played out in the military. When Trump came into office, he rescinded that Dear Colleague letter. Then Joe Biden came and put it back in. And this was a publicly vetted matter where Trump did express concerns for what happened to young men on college campuses who were accused of sexual assaults or sexually inappropriate behavior. He did, and he rescinded it for that reason. They want the ability to destroy people built into the system, in my opinion. And that's going on in the military as much as it was in our colleges and universities.
Paul, you're exactly right. I partner with people who fight for college men as well. So I've done an interview with a colleague who fights for them. I partner with them as well. And you're exactly right. That Dear Colleague letter came out, and I'll share with your audience how they tilted the scales. They not only put a thumb on the scale, they put a whole weight room on that thing. So think about a case where the civilian police investigated and they're like, there's nothing. They throw it out. So what that dear colleague letter basically did is, hey, you're not going to get funding if you don't change your system. So they create a non-judicial punishment style system similar to the military's, where the accuser has an attorney, the accused does not.
Right.
The accuser can present evidence. The accused does not get a copy of it and can't challenge it.
Right.
The accuser can say any statements they want. The accused does not get to cross-examine that person. So what President Trump did via Betsy DeVos and the Department of Education was he did this. It was, if you give this side an attorney, you have to give that side an attorney. If you present evidence, this person has to have the evidence, and they get to cross-examine. So there's a graphic that shows the number of lawsuits of universities spiked during that dear colleague time. Right. And then they came down when they changed the system. And then when President Biden changed it back, it of course went the other way. And I'm going to tell you why. They want the vote of women. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So I didn't know this until I started doing this work, but women vote at a higher rate in almost every category except one. I think for college graduates, it's the same rate, but for everything else, it's greater. Women vote. So I believe that the Democratic Party, they chose reproductive rights, abortion, and birth control, and they thought, well, all women will vote for us because look, we believe all women. And then the other part of that is they promoted certain transgender policies, and that's when they ran afoul of women. Well, women said, wait a minute, you're letting men compete in women's sports. And I think President Trump capitalized on that anger, where he went to them and says, look, this is not right. And so I think it's they're trying to appeal to women. So it's not only false accusations of sexual assault, it's false accusations of domestic violence as well. And I help with that as well.
And we're seeing that play out in our courts of law all the time in family courts. Ex parte restraining orders are issued without evidence or corroboration. Men are ripped out of their homes, separated from their children, have their property taken from them, all based on accusations. We are an accusation culture at this point.
I have a perfect story for that, if I could share it.
Sure.
We had a young man, and most of them in the military reluctant to come forward because they were in a BDSM style relationship. And so most of the men were submissives. So the woman was the dominant, they were submissive. So do you know where the only place she had bruises on her body? Her fist. And she admitted that she punched him in the face. So he was convicted. Not only she accused him of rape, but she sent her fantasies to him in messages of what she wanted. And he just tried to present that to the court to say, look at what she asked me to do. And he was not allowed. And she
admitted, rape shield laws doing
right.
that the sexual conduct of the person making the accusation is not allowed to be brought into question. So this key critical evidence is what happened to Marv Albert, this famous sports broadcaster. His life was destroyed, totally upended, with a woman who loved rough sex, who messaged him constantly to hit her, to choke her, to bite her. These are the things that she wanted. There was an ex-boyfriend ready to testify that that was what she wanted in the relationship with him, and the judge disallowed all of it.
Right. That's and Paul, the crazy thing is when I tell people this, it's some can't wrap their minds around it. Is the other thing is mental health. Now, the military recently changed because the highest military court allowed the accused to get access to mental health records now. But that's a recent change. And what's happening is the conviction rates are starting to stabilize now, because here's what I say is that someone with mental health, it doesn't mean that they're lying, but someone who lies probably has mental health issues. We have a case, Paul, where the woman admitted to her therapist that her problem, why she was getting therapy, is that she lies and falsely accused men. So the military knew that when they read through her records, and they waited till the day before trial to give it to his defense attorney. And we have a video of him, the defense attorney admitted this, and then they dropped the charges. But they tried to play chicken with him to take a deal. And there's a case I'm dealing with now where it was the ex-wife got mad that the man moved on. He takes a plea deal, right? Because he was worried he was going to be found guilty. His lawyer even said, look, the military is going to find you guilty. She wrote a letter. We have a copy of the letter where she said, look, I lied. And I got your ex-girlfriend to lie too, so I could get paid because I was jealous. So we give that to the military and we're just waiting to say, look, here's the person who accused him. And all they want to say is, well, he signed an agreement. Yeah, he signed an agreement because it was 30 years or 3.
Right.
Paul, it was so incredible that there was a policy that if the woman had 1 drink, she couldn't consent. Right. 1 drink, but the man could. And I'll give you that example. I tell people, you go out for your anniversary, you have a glass of champagne. Well, is your significant other a predator now? They can drive legally in any state in this country with 1 drink, but they can't consent to sex. So you had men taking plea agreements because they said, well, they were told by the attorneys, hey, she couldn't consent. She had 1 drink.
Wow.
And so that's the type of stuff that people just don't know. And I'm trying to get them to care about it and say something and say, look, this is wrong. You need to stop it and do something about it. Reverse these charges. The metaphor I use, and I'll be quiet till your next question, is imagine if somebody burned down thousands of houses. There were mice in those houses. So they said, you know what? Instead of just going after the mice, we're going to burn the whole house down, right? And they say, well, okay, we're not going to burn any more houses, but we don't want to acknowledge or fix the houses that we burned. Paul, what's to keep them from doing something else? And the military has.
Absolutely. You know, I think part of the problem, Arvis, must be that it's difficult for people to comprehend the level of evil that is involved in this sometimes. People don't want to believe that a prosecutor can know a guy is innocent, have evidence in front of him, and decide I'm going to destroy his life anyway, just to put a notch on my belt and to get another sexual assault conviction, which is good for me politically. But they do it all the time. And it is a pervasive problem throughout the criminal justice system, not just in the military or family courts, but across the board. We have corruption on a level that is just, it's mind-blowing. And I think a lot of times people want to think, oh, this couldn't possibly be happening on any, maybe a rogue prosecutor every once in a while, but systemically, no way. Yes. Way.
Paul, you're correct. You're right. And I tell people 2 primary tactics they use to get that outcome. So the investigators work for the prosecutors, and they get the evidence first, and then they decide what evidence goes to the defense. So we're called Brady violations. But what happens to a prosecutor who commits a Brady violation? Nothing, right?
Nothing.
So that's a tactic. That's probably one of their primary tactics. The other thing is, how do you rate a prosecutor? By their conviction rate.
Sure.
So you've created a system that incentivizes conviction rate, not justice rate. And then you've given those people immunity so that even if you find out they did something improper, there's no accountability.
And my experience fits with that totally, Arvis. I know that I've talked to hundreds upon hundreds of men who have been falsely accused over the years, many who spent time in prison, who were kicked out of the military, expelled from college, these things. And these guys, for the most part, walked into this so blind, so just absolutely thinking, I'm going to get justice. I'm going to tell my story, I'm going to put justice on the table. But guess what? During all those years, I've seen 2 prosecutors sanctioned. One was Mike Nifong in the Duke lacrosse case, where he knew forever that Crystal Gail Mangum was lying and that these guys were innocent. He ended up getting disbarred. And then there was Mary Kellett a few years back in Maine, who prosecuted Vladek Filler for a false accusation of rape from his wife. And she was, her license was suspended for 1 day.
A whole day.
A whole day.
Hold
And
that. All right.
then she got to go right back to practicing law. She did get fired from the prosecutor's office, but she's in private practice right now with a law license doing her thing. And she is a woman who pledged to put anything in jeans in prison. This is the level of corruption that we've got going on in this. And it still blows my mind. I try not to think about it because
Well,
this is Banana Republic stuff.
it is Banana Republic. I think about it every day. And I even go so far as to say, when I talk to groups who support, believe all women, is I go, do you believe that equal rights means equal responsibility and equal accountability? And I get a whole lot of silence from this group when I say, does equal rights mean equal responsibility and equal accountability? And what I'm getting at is, should false accusers be punished? My personal belief is put them on the registry. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is they say, well, the registry is not a punishment, right? And Paul, they say this because if you call the registry a punishment, then it goes against the Constitution and it's illegal and you have to do away with it. So they called it an administrative action. You can destroy someone's life with an administrative action. We
Yeah.
have cases, Paul, where they were found not guilty in court, but they're still titled. So they're in an FBI database for 40 years.
Oh, man.
They still can't purchase firearms. They still can't work with law enforcement. Their lives are still impacted. We have a young man in New York City. He applied to 64 jobs. In 2019, he went to court martial. He was Army, and he was found not guilty of all charges. He's honorably discharged. He goes to college. He applies to 64 jobs. He gets 0 interviews. His father does some investigating, and they looked and saw he was titled. And what most people don't know is, even if they don't send you to court martial and they do NJP, they still title you if there's an investigation. And they make it incredibly hard to remove that titling. And so it follows you everywhere and it can destroy your life. So that's what I want parents to know and people to know, because I just want you to be educated. Again, if you go down that road and you know what to expect, that's one thing. But most of these young men have no idea, Paul, unless they come to someone like yourself or like myself to understand. And they have to be able to believe it. But you said it yourself. It's hard for people to believe this.
Yes, it is. It's hard for people to believe that there is such unjust systems in full operation. You mentioned putting them on a registry. I can just share a personal anecdote about that. I started a website years ago called Register Her, and we started listing women for only one of two reasons would get them on that website. They had either admitted publicly to lying about rape, and it was confirmed in mainstream media, or they were convicted in a court of law of lying about rape. And we put those women up there. And I want to tell you, the mainstream media and a lot of the world lost its freaking mind. They were like, oh my God, you can't do this. This is going to turn them into targets. As a matter of fact, I started posting from that a few years back on Twitter when it was still a sort of not a free speech zone. And they gave me a lifetime ban because they said I was making targets of women. And these were all women who admitted they lied about rape and tried to destroy a man's life, or they got convicted by it. But if you went to put that out there publicly, and all I was doing was basically posting a news story saying, here, take a look. This woman didn't want to admit to her husband she had an affair, so she lied about rape, and linked them to the news article. That was enough to get me a lifetime ban. This is how. Put men on a registry, no problem. Leave them there forever. Ruin their lives, even though they weren't convicted, no problem. Nothing to see here, folks. But if you point at a woman who lied about rape, you're the bad guy.
You are exactly right, Paul. I will share an anecdote similar. I've gone to nonprofits, I've gone to media, I've gone to members of Congress, and they are afraid, to your point, of ever pointing the finger at punishing. I'm like, wait a minute, equal rights means equal responsibility and accountability. In the military, it gets worse. They will forgive collateral misconduct. So let's say someone has done something bad, Well, if you accuse someone of sexual assault or DV, all of that is forgiven. And you get a lifetime payment, and you get a PTSD designation from the VA, so you get more money and more benefits, and they get you a job, and they'll transfer you to the base of your choice. So we've had cases where they've admitted they were in trouble. We had one young lady, she had failed a PT course in the Army. She was worried about getting kicked out. She admitted that. But guess what? That was the case where they wouldn't allow him to use the video of her confession in court, and there was a CID agent in the room. He wasn't allowed to testify. And so, to your point, if it's a man, they'll do it in a heartbeat. Pardon me. But if it's a woman, they're like, whoa, we can't. And I go, well, equal rights means equal accountability and responsibility. Story. I found a nonprofit to help us at one point, and I don't want to share their name because they were gracious enough to help, and then they fell off. So it took me 6 months to get them to try. And I told them who I had gone to, and they said, Arbus, I'm going to tell you the number one reason why they didn't help, and we will. And I'm like, shoot, go ahead. They were like, do you know how much federal funding they receive? I said, no, I didn't look into that. I didn't even think of that. This is a group that helps people who've been false. They go, we get $1 million in federal funding. We can replace that in a few minutes. And literally, they were helping. They were helping me. They got all of their agenda passed except ours if they dropped it, and then they quit talking to me, right? And I mean, they couldn't make eye contact with me. And all I said was federal funding. And so they never answered. And I want to be gracious because they did try and help initially. They went to a group of lawyers. It was about a dozen or more female attorneys, very prominent, who were going to speak in front of Congress, who wanted people to talk about what's happening in the military. So a member of this nonprofit gave them my information and said, Arbus, they knew who I was, Paul. They looked and they go, we don't want him speaking in front of Congress. I asked them, see, ask him if I'm lying. Ask him if I'm not telling the truth. Oh, no, Arb, they know you are, but they don't want you to get to Congress. We've had one person get to Congress. He was a retired, he's a retired colonel now in the Air Force, but he got there in 2019. We have his recording where he said this is happening at this alarming rate. So the only outcome, and it was a good outcome, I'm appreciative that he did it, was before in the military, you could get found guilty with 6 people on your panel or jury. So people know that the smaller your panel size, the higher the chances you get found guilty. So in the military, it used to be 6. They moved it from 6 to 8. And before it was 2/3 majority to get found guilty. And now it's 3/4. So they did a little bit of a change, but they refused to look back. And again, it's how can parents trust the military again if they admit it? That's what the military's thinking. How can they ever trust us again? Not to mention, you have men who've killed themselves. Unfortunately, I deal with families where the person killed themselves. And my last statement with that is, we even had a woman who came to us who she falsely accused a man. He killed himself. She came forward and says, I lied. I'm so sorry I lied. Paul, that man doesn't get a do-over, right?
No, he doesn't.
She still gets VA benefits. She's not prosecuted. Now, mentally, she has some mental health issues, but still, that man is no longer with us. And the military wouldn't give his family the justice in death that he deserved in life. And those are the types of cases, when I bring them forth, I'm so thankful for people like yourself that allow it to be heard.
And we need to get that message to parents and help them understand. If your son goes in the military and faces a false accusation, he will not receive justice, not without some divine intervention or some unusual circumstance that lends itself toward the accident of him getting justice. He will not be given what anybody would call due process or fair due process in a court. He'll be outgunned, outmaneuvered from the beginning. It's something to think about before you encourage your children to serve. I'm sorry to say that. I serve myself. I believe in serving your country, but I also believe in justice, and the military is not doing a very good job of it right now. Arvis, at some point, do you feel like your life is going to be made whole again?
I do, because I believe in this country, I believe in this military, and I believe that they want to do the right thing. It's just what that looks like and how. And so that's why I've dedicated my life. And I tell people this because a lot of men become broken. I call them bears. They go into a cave, they shut themselves off, and they won't come forward. And I said, you were willing to die for your country in the military. Well, how about you live for your country and you tell your story and you fight for justice? The other thing, too, is I have two sons. They're 14, about to be 15 in a couple of weeks. It's most people didn't get this, but now you get automatically registered for selective services. And this is men only from age 18 to like 25, I believe it is. So guess what? There's a great chance my sons could be drafted, and I want to change this system for them. So I say not only for myself and the hundreds, the thousands of men I represent, but for my own sons, that they may not have a choice in joining, because if they don't fix the quality recruiting situation, well, then draft is the only option. And that scares politicians too. They don't want to admit the draft thing.
Right. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about this topic that you would like to, in closing, share with my audience and whoever ends up watching this important discussion?
Three things, Paul. Thing one, and I've said this a couple of times, I want people to share this as widely as possible so people hear it. Two, I would like for them to sign and share our petition, which is www.change.org/unjust UCMJ. And I'll educate them about that. Change asks for a donation so they can promote it. You don't have to sign up for that. We turn that function off. If you don't have that function, they'll show you 10 or so other petitions before you get to ours, who does allow for them to collect. So just skip through those. And then the third and final thing is, if you know someone that needs help, reach out to Paul, reach out to myself so I can help. I hate to say 27-0. The people who've come to me before they've gone to court martial were 27-0, because I know things now that I didn't when I went through my court martial. I want to make sure your son's protected. I want to make sure your uncle, father, brother, cousin, family member, neighbor is protected. And so please reach out.
Yeah, by all means, if this is resonating with you, with what Arvis is saying, is reminding you of your own life, by all means, reach out to me, paul@paulelam.com, and I will put you in touch with Arvis. Also, men who've been falsely accused, I just want to give a plug for XY Crew here. We do men's meetings throughout the week on Zoom, and we meet for real life events as well. I would guess 25–30% of our membership are men who have suffered false accusations in one way or another, either in the military or family courts. So there's guys there that understand. Sometimes just being around other people that don't look at you suspiciously, that are actually aware of the problem, is a good, healthy thing to do. So I invite you to visit that link too, as well. There'll be a link to Arvis's petition, some other documents for those interested that are associated with this case. Arvis Owens, I want to thank you very much for what you're doing, man. I tell you, it's badly needed. One of the things I'll just add to this, I really got angry reading that affidavit by that rear admiral, because what went through my mind is, why the hell didn't you stand up on principle to begin with? It is just disgusting to me that we have so many men that will throw their fellow man under the bus because it feels good, because it's convenient, or because somebody might not like it if they don't throw them under the bus. We do need men of principle standing up for due process in our military, in our family courts, and in our criminal courts. Right now, we're not getting it. Arvis, thanks. Folks, we'll see you on the next round. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.